So welcome today to our Price Formation Enhancements Working Group session number 5. My name is Brenda Corona on behalf of the Stakeholder Affairs Group. We welcome you to a California ISO Working Group session. We will have a few topics to discuss, but first let's go ahead and remind everyone for this call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. As well as during this working group session, we encourage a lot of dialogue, chat questions. As well, we're going to be utilizing the Slido to develop any questions or problem statements throughout the meeting. As a note, we did update the pre-registration, so we thank everyone who has been able to successfully pre-register. That's a new process that we're going to start kicking off with all the stakeholder calls. But other than that, let's go ahead and do a quick instructions to the WebEx. For this WebEx, you may use the raise hand icon located in the lower toolbar. There you will be unmuted. While you're unmuted, make sure you do not mute yourself. It will lock you at the time of your muting. Make sure to state your full name and affiliation, so therefore we can know who's speaking. At this time, we do utilize the polling app, so the icon in green will be showing up on the right-hand corner, and that will give you insight on when we use it. Juan will be giving those instructions to provide into Slido when to do it, and we look forward to any encouragement of different dialogue or questions throughout this meeting. And then with this today's agenda, we plan to go over today's goals and also the next session with Juan, and he would also be discussing the discussion paper overview of what we posted last Thursday. That discussion paper is now available on the Price Formation Enhancements Working Group initial website, and we will be able to send that link out in a short few minutes. But also, Juan will also be providing a problem statement formulation example problem statement slide deck. So that will give a lot of ideas from our team members, from James and Sylvie, who've been able to provide that emphasis and great structure for today's meeting. So thanks so much. Let's go ahead and get started and have Juan, kick things off for today.
Before we move to Juan, can you hear me, Brenda?
We can't
hear me.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, before we move on, I just wanted to give people a heads up on the new registration process. This is Keone Almeida. I'm the manager of Stakeholder Affairs. And the reason behind doing that is because stakeholders have asked to see who else is on the stakeholder call on the WebEx. WebEx had made a change that did not allow for other people to see who else was on the call. So to work around that, we now have you pre-register, and then what we'll do is we'll post a link to the chat, and you'll see all that, who's on the call, and just their name and their company name, and that's it. So I just wanted to give some background on that so that people understood why we're doing the registration process. Thank you. Have a good meeting.
Thanks, Keone. Great. Let's go ahead and introduce Juan to kick us off, and we'll be sending those chat things in our, oh, one more slide. We do have this ISO stakeholder process, but we'll go ahead and kick things off because that one is just repetitive from last time. Go ahead, Juan.
Thank you very much, Brenda, and thank you everybody for making the time. Keone, I saw your hand pop up again. I just want to make sure. Do you have anything else for us today?
No, I'm trying to lower it. Thank you.
All right, very good. Well, thank you everybody for joining us here for working group session number 5 for Price Formation Enhancements. I'm going to start moving through these a little bit quicker, but I do think it's important to kind of refresh, right, what the deliverable of this working group is, because that is what all these discussions are intended to kind of drive towards, and that is that action plan, and really kind of want to highlight, again, this very iterative process of the discussion paper to the working group, and we're going to kind of highlight that iterative process as it relates to problem statement formulation a little bit later in this session. So keeping our eye on the prize, the goals of today's working groups, we would like to kind of conclude that conversation on the history in the context of the current BAA level market power mitigation construct. We're going to be walking through a review of the price formation discussion paper. As Brenda mentioned, we did post that last week on Thursday. So it is up on the initiative page for you to review. We will be launching a combination comment template that will allow you to both provide comment to this working group session number 5, as well as that discussion paper. So that will be going out shortly after this session. We really encourage your feedback in any way and, in multiple avenues, verbally here, through Slido, through chat, through the commenting tool. Again, this is really just a mechanism. The working group is a mechanism for us to understand the stakeholder sentiment on issues and the perspectives that you have. So we're trying to facilitate that, right, by giving you multiple pathways for that. So keep an eye out for that comment template shortly after this meeting wraps up. There's several items within the discussion paper we'd like to kind of go over and get some, immediate feedback on, but again, you will have an opportunity through the commenting tool. And that's the evolution of that discussion paper and the working group process. Not only are scope items and problem statements and principles something that we want to iterate back and forth on with stakeholder perspective, but also this working group process in its own right, it is something that is relatively new for us, so we want to get that feedback on what we're proposing for the evolution of the discussion paper to be revised and kind of lead to that action plan, and then of course always open for feedback on the working group process itself to ensure that you're getting the value out of it that we're hoping that you do. I want to take a little bit of time to go over the guiding principles that are outlined in that discussion paper, as well as the theme and topic areas that have been identified through the discussions thus far, as well as through stakeholder comment. And going to pose that question of, are there any new areas or any new themes for discussion, right? Or perhaps I like Sylvie uses a term internally here, kind of a click down, right? Are there any scope items that have been identified for problem statement formulation, and are there perhaps any new scoping items that should be included into the discussion? So we will leverage Slido for that portion of this session. And then we want to go into a little bit of a workshop under problem statement formulation. I know that the end goal for the first phase here is to try to arrive at a problem statement so we can use those principles and get prioritization feedback from stakeholders. So these are some illustrative examples. I will go into more detail on this, but these are not endorsed problem statements or something that will be reflected in the discussion paper. This is much more a workshop to illustrate the formulation of a proper problem statement so that it can inform policy development. Again, remember, working groups are meant to get all of this feedback to then inform and have those perspectives included in policy development. So we'll be going through that workshop together here at the end of the session. So if we could move to the next slide, please. Oh, looks like I have the ability to do so. Okay. So we left the last working group session kind of running up on time on the discussion of BAA level market power mitigation as it relates to the current construct. Several comments and questions came in through Slido at the end of the last session, and there's kind of a need for, we want to acknowledge those, right? And so one of the comments that really kind of came in, and again, this deck is posted, wanted to provide some reference material, kind of more details on the current MPM tests. So here you'll see it's within our EIM BPM or the market operations BPM with the specific sections listed out there, or market instruments BPM for the appendix attachment D. Those are how it sits today. So I would encourage everybody to take a look there if you wanted more details on those MPM tests. And again, you can leverage the comments as well if there are any kind of remaining items that need further clarification there. Some of the other comments that came in, we want to represent these. That's a very important part of this working group structure, is to be representative of the feedback that we're getting. But we felt they were kind of outside of the level set conversation here. And so I'm going to let you guys kind of take a look at these. I'm going to pull on a couple of threads here, and I hope that people, whether it was you who put the comment in at the end of the last session, or perhaps the comment resonates with you, I'm very hopeful that we can have some kind of discussion here. So one of the pieces of feedback we got through Slido at the end of the last session was somebody was still uncomfortable how to clearly evaluate the pros and cons between the grouping and individual. And to that, I would say, I think that's completely valid, and something that, frankly, this piece of feedback is going to be leveraged pretty heavily as we kind of continue in the working group process, maybe the thematic session for BA level MPM, but that's kind of outside of the intent of the level set conversation we were having on BA MPM, and I would actually say that this is somewhat related to the problem statement formulation. So I want you to kind of keep that in mind. We will be workshopping this a little bit later in this session, but wanted to definitely represent what came in through Slido, and just a friendly reminder that the Slido comments, for those of you who are interested, are also posted on our initiative page. Here's one that I wanted to kind of pull on a little bit. We got a request for a written paper with data to articulate the history and how MPM was formed. So again, Slido does allow you to provide anonymous comment and anonymous feedback. So this is one question where I would like to start kind of digging in a little bit. I have a clarifying question immediately, right, for the person, if they feel comfortable, who put this in. You know, how MPM was formed as opposed to the BAA level. I'm making an assumption here that it was for the BAA level, because again, that is kind of what is in scope here for this conversation. But what data would you be looking for to kind of better understand BAA level MPM? So this is something that I'd like to open it up to this group here. If you feel like, again, in the framing of a level set of how it is currently operating today, to perhaps inform whether or not enhancements are necessary, what data are you looking for as far as how it's operating today? So I'm going to pause here, and hopefully we get some hands up so we can kind of stimulate this conversation a little bit. But we want to address this piece of feedback, but we need a little help understanding the scope of what data you're looking for. So again, the question is, as it relates to BAA level MPM as it operates today, what data are you looking for to kind of better understand this? So do we have any takers? Is anybody willing to kind of raise their hand, whether they made that comment or the comment resonates with them? Okay, I'm hearing none. If you'd like to reach out offline, please feel free. But again, we are also exploring, you know, different avenues to provide information, whether that be recorded sessions or, as this comment was asking for, you know, data to articulate the history in a written format in which we can post to. Oh, looks like we do have a comment in chat. Appreciate that. So the frequency of mitigation within the WEIM today, test of grouping methodology on WEIM data to see how it changes the results, so kind of a counterfactual, and then analysis of implications for EDAM, which may include increased supply and enhanced transmission availability. I appreciate that. I appreciate your participation and kind of getting the ball rolling here. I think that you know, some of those are probably kind of leaning towards the solution, but I think that's very, there's definitely a need there, right, in order to inform the conversation towards that problem statement creation. So data on the number of independent generators and LSCs in each BAA, if such data is available. So I appreciate you putting that into the chat there, visible to all panelists. Let us take that back and see what we can't come back to you guys with on that. A couple of others, and we'll move on. So analysis on how this basically reiterates the comment there in the chat. Again, kind of leaning towards that problem statement formulation. And then we have kind of a broader question here, and I might lean on James as my subject matter expert here to kind of help address this one, but with broader participation in WIM, the structural issues still apply as they did during the early days that were referenced. So James, this is kind of almost a borderline conceptual hypothetical, but would you like to take a stab at addressing that one?
Hey, Juan, sure. The slides were a little bit behind you. Can you repeat the question now that we have the right slide?
Sure. With broader participation in WIM, do the structural issues that BAA level MPM addresses still apply as they did during the early days that were referenced? And if you were the individual who asked this question, I think, you know, well, that's the question at hand, James. I'm not sure if that's something that we'd be able to kind of address, but.
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been an BIM participant that has pleaded with the ISO or FERC to exclude themselves from the application of market power mitigation on their transfer constraints. There is a potential way to assess, like if someone is interested in like answering questions about third-party generators and load, that type of stuff, and whether or not that BAs are differently situated than they were however many years ago. One place of reference might be in market-based rate authority dockets within FERC, where utilities participating in markets get authority from FERC to participate on a market basis, meaning that they don't have to submit cost-based bids into the market. And as part of those types of filings, utilities generally provide information about the sort of their structural competitiveness as a BAA, which may include some specific details about, you know, the proportion of load or supply within the BAA that's not entity owned or, you know, associated with the entity that operates the BAA. So that may be one place to look. But a simple answer to this question is I'm not sure. I don't think so. And if there has been updates in the situations with these participants, it hasn't been made aware to the policy team at this point. Hope that helps.
No, that definitely helps. Thank you, James. And I'm seeing some, James, you made a verbal comment to it, and I'm seeing some in the chat as well. So, and my producer, thanks for sending the presenter privileges over to me. So I apologize for that. Looks like we were lagging behind visually there. So, quick confirmation, just a show of hands or thumbs up. You guys are seeing slide number 10?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So we want to take a little bit of time, again, if you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at the price formation enhancement discussion paper, it is up on the initiative page, and it will be open for comment. So we will have that comment template out shortly after this session itself. This is to serve as a very much a living document. It is to kind of reflect the discussions and any decisions that have come from the working group process. Thank you, Brenda. There is a link to the discussion paper itself in the chat right now for those of you who are interested. It's an iterative living document. It will continue as revised discussion papers reflecting the actual conversation and any action items that come out of that. It will have revision tracking for transparent record of those conversations. So it'll kind of, it'll memorialize and show the progression of the conversation throughout the working group process. It will keep those action items tracked so that we can maintain momentum here, as well as just you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback and comments on each iteration. And that does not simply include the content within the discussion paper, but we would also appreciate and request feedback on the layout and the way that we have kind of proposed the evolution of the discussion paper here, ultimately leading to that action plan. Another section of this PFE discussion paper, again, asking for feedback on this is the working group process itself, right, which we kind of at a high level identify as just identifying throughout the stakeholder community the areas of challenge or opportunity that are within scope of a policy initiative. We're going to form those problem statements. We will spend quite a bit of time on that a little bit later today. So again, a problem statement is founded on a root cause related to an intended market outcome. The working group process is then going to reiterate on those problem statements, going a little bit deeper to illustrate and justify those problem statements, whether that means that, as we did last session with the kind of history and current mechanism that is BAA level MPM, that could be exploring the current market constructs that the problem statement's meant to address. It could be scoping out a methodology for analysis to justify that said problem statement. And then again, we are going to be determining action items based off of those. We want to have an alignment. This is a little bit further down the road in the working group process, but alignment on the priorities, as well as ensuring that we're providing a good bridge from the working group, which is understanding the perspective of stakeholders and putting their input into that action plan to serve as a bridge to go into the actual policy development, which would be a straw proposal. And I know that we've frequently mentioned this with price formation enhancements, as opposed to some of the other working groups that started with a working group. That was not the case here with price formation enhancements. And this discussion paper is, in essence, through the working group process and that discussion paper, we're trying to bring it back in equal footing to kind of that pre-initiative phase. So I want us to mentally kind of shift that as well, right, and mirror what the intent of the working group is when we're formulating these problem statements and asking for feedback from this community. We also spend a little bit of time highlighting and outlining the guiding principles throughout the discussion paper. Now, the price formation enhancement principles, they will continue to evolve and be developed throughout the working group. I think as problem statement formulation really picks up, and we have an inventory of problem statements. If we start getting to the discussion of trade-offs and prioritization, these principles are incredibly important. They serve as a reference point, not only for that initial problem statement development, but then they facilitate that comparison, prioritization, and the assessment of any potential trade-offs that are within that problem statement. So to kind of reuse that language of a click down, when we started the working group discussions, we started with kind of high-level principles, one-word principles, efficiency, simplicity, transparency, and feasibility. We're starting to dive a little bit deeper into the feedback of the comments we've received from stakeholders to formulate problem statements, so the principles should likely continue to evolve and go into that click down, so to speak, that will allow us to facilitate the conversation on prioritization and potential trade-offs. So again, these aren't codified. This is what is in the discussion paper now, and it's open, and we welcome and ask for your feedback on this. But let's get the efficiency defined a little bit more, right? So efficiency, dispatch on offer prices will minimize actual system production costs, right? Simplicity, the market rules apply consistently and indiscriminately. Transparency, sufficient information exists to make competitive bidding decisions. Feasibility is one that we've gotten a lot of feedback on verbally, right, about the prescribed timelines, consideration for implementation timelines. This is our attempt to reflect what the earlier working group sessions on guiding principles, what we kind of pulled out of that. Again, please provide your comment and feedback, not only on these top four, but throughout that discussion. We also had a couple of other principles come up and we wanted to reflect those in the discussion paper. Again, this is to really mirror and show the evolution of discussion in working groups. And those are accuracy, effectiveness, and competition as guiding principles. So that kind of brings us to, I want to take us back to this guiding principle discussion. I was hoping we could get a little bit of feedback from you guys right now. Again, these are stakeholder proposed guiding principles to include into price formation enhancements. And so what are some of the scope items that come to mind when you think of these principles as it relates to price formation? What are some of the things that you want to see through the guiding principle of accuracy? When you think of effectiveness with scarcity pricing and BA level MPM and potentially even fast start pricing, right? When you think of competition. So right now we have the Slido poll open. You should see all 3 questions open to you. So I'm going to go ahead and give everybody a little bit of time to share their thoughts on this. What principal items come to mind when you think of accuracy, effectiveness, and competition? And we can also take, please do feel free to, if you want to kind of start the conversation, I hope we get some takers here. Feel free to raise your hand with any kind of clarifying thoughts, or if you want to throw one out there so that the rest of the community can also talk about it. So let's give a little bit of time here for the Slido poll, but also feel free to raise your hand. You guys are a quiet group today. No hands?
I don't see any hands as well, but I'll keep monitoring that for you, Juan.
Thank you, Brenda. I appreciate that. Again, if you've had a chance to review the discussion paper, these click downs, maybe a little bit more granular of the guiding principles for the ones originally proposed. Those are reflective of this very conversation, of what we heard from stakeholders. And through those conversations, we also had 3 new guiding principles proposed. So would really value your perspective on these. So that we can make those decisions as to whether or not to include them. And again, these guiding principles will evolve. They will be part of that iterative process. I do see a hand. Could we go ahead and unmute Sybil? Please go ahead.
I think she lowered her hand, but let's go ahead and give her a minute. I think there she is. Okay, don't put your hand down. 1 second. Thanks.
Thanks for these questions, Juan, and including these as we think about the scope items. Just so I'm clear on the feedback that you're requesting, are you talking about both the BA level market power mitigation topic and the scarcity price topic?
That's a great clarifying question. I am, and I apologize for not being clear. I am looking at it for both. Now, if you feel like, you know, if your feedback in your perspective is that it should be, you know, sectioned off to one, you know, please feel free to share that as well, right? This is again to kind of stimulate that dialogue. Just wanted to be representative of the newer guiding principles that were also proposed. So great question. My intent was both, but feel free to make it your own.
Thank you. And then we're talking scope items. In the Slido, it's saying principal items, which is a little confusing, but you're talking about scope items, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thanks.
So what comes to mind with that feedback, we can further discussion and come back with these three guiding principles. So thank you. All right, I see John's hand up. Let's go ahead and unmute John.
The question, as I was kind of reading through, is there any kind of penalty associated with the participant who constantly is the beneficiary of scarcity pricing? Kind of saying that they may be the one who is causing scarcity throughout the system. If they continuously cause scarcity throughout the system, is there some kind of dissuading mechanism for them to take effort to resolve the problem without relying on the system?
So John, that's, you know, I'm gonna maybe either Sylvie or James want to take a crack at that one, but I would ask you which one of the principles would you see that kind of falling under?
So I would see that falling under a combination of effectiveness and competition under those two principles, because if the system allows a person to continually take advantage of the system and doesn't incentivize them to correct their, for lack of a better phrase, we'll say failure to supply for themselves, right, then the system can be deemed as not very effective, and the system is not sufficiently competitive to dissuade that conduct.
I like it. No, I appreciate that, John. So it looks like we don't have. So it looks like we don't have Sylvia on audio, but you know what, John? I appreciate that comment. Definitely take that in. I think that's something that, when it comes to problem statement formulation, that's precisely what we're looking for as far as kind of a guiding principle. And that's how you're seeing, you know, effectiveness and competition being defined. So I appreciate you sharing that. I see James has his hand up here. James, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I guess I just follow up and ask, you know, I think that the answer to that question depends on the type of behavior in question, whether it's the inferring sort of a system planning failure, you know, like entities in a market that may have procured less long-term supply, and is this a leaning concern, or is this a market power concern? So I guess it just depends on what the behavior in question.
Yeah, I get what you're going under. I think probably the difficulty would be in the hypothetical case, right? Because it is a hypothetical. I suppose the way that I would say it is, at what point does the scarcity pricing and the additional cost incurred become simply just the price of doing business, right? So clearly we would want the scarcity pricing to allow for the participants to rely on the market during certain situations, understanding that there are additional costs associated with it. But if the scarcity pricing mechanism essentially does not dissuade for continued reliance. It just becomes the price of doing business, in which case, why would I build out, for example, additional capital if it's cheaper for me just to go and hit the market knowing that the scarcity price is whatever the scarcity price tends to be, which should be able to be inferred from the accuracy guiding principle, because under the accuracy, right, your prices should be very similar in similar market conditions, right? Those prices should converge upon around a certain value.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is James again. So it sounds, it sounds like the comment is a little bit about. I take the question to sort of hear it. I hear the question as sort of like, you know, if I want to access in periods of scarcity, if I'm able to access supply and pay the scarcity price to access supply from somebody else in the market who has built out supply, you know, sufficient to serve their needs and in excess of their needs, and I'm sort of relying on the market to find me power in those scarce conditions, does it disincentivize me from, you know, my own sort of long-term planning needs and making sure I have the right capacity to meet my own, you know, my own needs in the long run, when I can sort of procure and sort of top off, maybe even cheaper than it would be for me to build my own units to serve my needs, but I could sort of rely on the system to procure scarce power a couple of days of the year potentially.
Yeah, correct.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, that would be correct, and that would also be excluding the legality of settlement for scarcity pricing, right? Because there is every possibility that there could be a dispute that the scarcity pricing is exploitative, right, in the given interval. So even though the scarcity pricing may jump up for the sake of argument to something like, I don't know, $7,000 a megawatt hour, and you did take the energy from me, then you come back and sue me saying that I was exploiting you, and the end, the result of litigation is you get that energy for, say, $1,000 a megawatt hour. And, you know, unless there's again, a mechanism to kind of dissuade that continued conduct, there's no reason for me not to just consider that, or for them, wherever they may be, to consider that the price of doing business. So I'm not going to build out that additional capacity for scarcity. I'm just going to go ahead and hit that scarcity market and then file my lawsuit with my lawyers, who are cheaper than a new combustion turbine, who will then sue to lower the price down to a reasonable level.
Yeah, so there's also a bit of an element of market power concern in your question too, I think.
Correct.
So maybe it's a combination of the two. Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate the question.
Agreed, and I do see competition and effectiveness kind of coming into it, but you know, I would say that through the lens of competition, if it is a guiding principle, right? I mean, if we're getting into, again, I feel like this is kind of getting into maybe problem statement formulation, but the principle of competition and effectiveness, I think, would lead that problem statement formulation to try to create something robust enough for that not to be the case. But yeah, no, I appreciate the comment as well, John. Thank you for speaking up here. So James, we have something in the chat here for you specifically. Now compare with diversity benefits. Do you wanna take a crack at that?
Yeah, again, it's I need some semantic help understanding precisely what diversity benefits. You know, one thing to elaborate on in the previous discussion, maybe this helps answer CD's comment, but you know, it's still within the local regulatory authorities' jurisdiction to be setting proper planning targets for its system needs, and that we have a market with multiple, you know, LRAs in which their jurisdictional entities may be in different planning requirements and maybe planning stringencies. One of the interesting questions is, when you have, different planning requirements, you inherently may have certain entities who are, in a sense, more willing to be under scarce conditions than others. For example, if you have some entities that have higher, let's say all else equal, one entity has a higher planning reserve margin than another, the entity that has a higher planning reserve margin probably finds themselves, in scarce conditions less frequently than another. And so are there ways to sort of facilitate a scarcity pricing scheme that sort of works with different entities that have different, I guess, inherent willingness to push themselves to the edge? Be interesting to hear if there's any thoughts on something like that.
So while the event producer gets the survey results visible here, any thoughts to James's statement there? All right. Well, I'm hearing none, James, but we look forward to. Mike, good to hear from you. Please go ahead. One sec, Mike. Event producer, if we could unmute Mike Whitney. Ryan, feedback heard. 1 minute warning before closing the comments from here on out. Apologies and thank you for pointing that out.
All right,
Mike, looks like you're unmuted.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay, Juan?
Yes, we can.
This is Mike Whitney with NCPA. I'm probably getting ahead of the slide deck, but I guess I'd like to hear from the market participant or participants that requested adding these principles. There's not a whole lot of context that I was able to easily find from the discussion paper. So that might kind of help me form my thoughts around the intent behind including these and some ideas of, how to frame them within the initiative.
Yeah, Mike, I think for the most part, this was part of the actual, just the back and forth discussion, I want to say in working group number 2. And, one of the, and this is a piece of good feedback, again, as I mentioned on the working group process and the discussion paper itself. So I'd be interested to hear from the rest of the community if that resonates. We had kind of been leaning towards kind of a Chatham House rules, right, of allowing the comments without necessarily attributing them to a particular market participant. The Slido polling will allow you to, answer anonymously. But that is, I appreciate you sharing that, Mike, and maybe I would suggest taking a look at the recording of working group session 2. But I think you bring up a good point of feedback that we'd like this community to give to us as it relates to the evolution of the discussion paper. Would anyone care to kind of respond to Mike there, as far as the stakeholders who competition kind of resonated towards the end of working group session 2? I know that feels like a while ago, right? But anybody willing to respond if these 3 guiding principles, proposed guiding principles, kind of resonated with you earlier on in this process? Yeah, Sybil, please. So we have Sybil and John. Let's go ahead with Sybil first, and John, we'll go to you next.
Event producer, can you go ahead and unmute our first raised hand, please? Go ahead. You're unmuted.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so I don't recall now if these are ones that we have added in, but you know, and I think we'll speak to some of these in the comments that we're about to submit that are due tomorrow. But you know, I think some of the scope items that have come up around accuracy, particularly in the scarcity price conversation, speak to times when we have issues where maybe there's out of market actions or for example, triggering of DR strategic reserves that can, you know, are clearly a condition of shortage for the market, but can have repercussions in real-time price formation that are in some participants' opinion, not sending the appropriate signal at that time. And so, you know, accuracy, I think someone said this earlier, one way of framing it in the scarcity design is the idea of like prices under like conditions. So making sure that we don't have issues where participants can be harmed by, you know, showing up when we're getting the signal you need to show up, and then having the price not represent that shortage condition when it is truly still occurring, for example, in real time as it compares to hour ahead or day ahead price signals. So that's just one example. And then in terms of accuracy as it may apply to market power mitigation, you know, PGP has a principle that relates to this, which is that, you know, we want to make sure that market power is only applied when the opportunity to exercise market power actually exists. So that's just it aligns really well with this principle of accuracy, and I think makes sense from a design perspective and a litmus test as to if this is having the intended effect in the marketplace. One thing that has come up, and I didn't put the competition one in here, but I think that sort of resonated for me in some other conversations, and actually it was raised in the discussion paper here, was this idea of, you know, in this voluntary market participation construct that we have in the EDAM, for example, there's an issue where the concern or risk of over mitigation can sometimes have the unintended effect of, you know, stifling participant interest and therefore reducing competition, which is, you know, a sort of a bad spiral to get into. So we really appreciated the way that was framed as one of the concepts for addressing, as listed in the discussion paper. And I think it speaks directly to that concept of the competition being important. So those are just a couple of thoughts I had on those. They weren't necessarily ones that we added in, but I do think they're worth including.
I appreciate you, Shannon. Thank you. Let's go ahead and unmute John, and just in the interest of time, I'm going to go through the next section pretty quickly here. But John, let's go ahead and take your comment. John, bear with us one moment here. We'll get you unmuted.
Yes, thank you. So I do like the guiding principles, but my question is along the lines of, I believe the saying is, no man can serve two masters and be completely loyal to both, much less three of them. So my first question, it's a two-parter. My first question is, in the event that all three of these guiding principles cannot be balanced, which principle takes precedence? Which one gets essentially overrides all the other principles? And then, not as part of this call, but I would like to hear some examples going in the future on how one principle can be used to abuse the market effectively in one way or another. So, for example, the earlier topic that I brought up is relying on the accuracy as a means to effectively abuse the market in terms of effectiveness and competition, right? And as Sybil was just talking about, I think it was Sybil, the competition element can be, or the effectiveness element can be utilized to abuse in terms of accuracy and competition, right? So if you want it to be effective, you may end up stifling competition in order to have it so that you get a more accurate result in regards to dealing with scarcity situations, but you sacrificed the competition element of the process in order to do so, and vice versa. So not something I want to cover in detail here, but something I'd like to hear more about going forward.
Yeah, no, John, I appreciate that, and I think it's important for us to take a look at these guiding principles not as in a hierarchy of overriding one over the other, but when we say that once we get to a problem statement and we're looking at the prioritization and potential trade-offs of that, I think you're highlighting precisely that. I think you're highlighting the fact that, or at least the intent of these guiding principles is not to be in a hierarchy, but rather that each problem statement is going to have that discussion of what are the trade-offs for it, and that will eventually lead not only to refining that problem statement, but also its prioritization within this overall effort. So I hope I was tracking with where you were going, but James, I see your hand up. Let's go ahead and take James's comment and then move, or John, go ahead.
Just really quickly. In one sense, yes, I agree with what you're saying there, but I think that we are mistaken if we think that one of them will not take a priority in most situations. It's kind of like saying honesty and respect are two things that are guiding principles, but sometimes those two principles don't align. They do align often enough, but when they don't align, which one do we choose? Right? Do we sacrifice honesty for the sake of respect, or do we show respect in terms of giving pure honesty and the person may feel disrespected? We have to pick one. So that's kind of the crux of my question, is that. But anyway, go ahead, James.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about these principles is that you can almost think of them as a way to evaluate trade-offs. And when we put principles on the slide, there is an understanding that at times they will conflict with each other, as you're pointing out. And your question is, well, how do you know which one is the better one? And when it comes down to it, which one do we care about most? And there's no real answer to that question, honestly, and which is kind of part of like what the stakeholder discussion is about, is that in all market design policy changes, there are trade-offs. And one way to think about these principles is a sort of way to evaluate trade-offs in different ways. And ultimately, that sort of helps, guide stakeholders and the ISO and others to, come to a decision. So hopefully that's a helpful way of thinking about it. And I know it's not a direct answer to the question, but just, I guess, sort of generally acknowledgement that you're right. Principles conflict sometimes. And at the end of the day, the stakeholder community has to come to come to an agreement about whether what trade-off is the right trade-off.
Right, and I definitely agree with that. I am also pointing out, though, that defaults do exist in order to resolve paradoxes. So that's really kind of what I'm getting at, is what will be the default when we have a paradoxical situation, right? Where there is no necessarily, no particular trade-off is better than any other particular trade-off, but we still have to pick one. What's the one we pick? So that's all. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, guys. Again, in the interest of time, I am gonna move forward. We will take the Slido comments here and reflect them within the discussion paper. We will also be posting them to the initiative page so that they can be reviewed by the stakeholder community here. But I want to get to the problem statement formulation workshop portion of this, but I do want to also kind of provide the overview of the discussion paper. So in that discussion paper, we also identified a couple of themes or topic areas that we kind of grouped up from the discussions and comments that we've gotten from stakeholders. These include how to reflect the value of reliability and price during scarce conditions, how and when to enact and end scarcity pricing, civil to, out-of-market actions, scarcity pricing competitiveness of bilateral transactions occurring during scarce conditions, the compatibility with pricing in RA and in the broader West and other markets to signal voluntary supply, and then finally with the level set that we had last session, BAA level market power mitigation. Now, within that discussion paper, we took some of those scope items that we had been hearing for each one of these individuals. So again, kind of taking that click down concept, each one of these individual themes. Now, these themes are going to be what we are asking stakeholders to weigh in on. Apologies. To kind of develop presentations, share the perspectives, and really take the next step into problem statement formulation. So these are all listed as individual sections within the discussion paper. But for example, we heard that we need to incentivize accurate day-ahead schedules, the use of dynamic demand curves and penalty mechanisms, whether value of lost load, how to determine it and its applicability, right? These are all scope items that could be crafted into problem statements, but we felt like they fell into these themes, and so we wanted to kind of help the conversation by grouping them together into these kind of thematic elements. So, for example, the how and when to end or enact or end scarcity pricing. Should we have the mechanisms to signal that scarce conditions are imminent, right? And again, I apologize for moving quickly here, but I didn't want to end that discussion earlier, but I do also want to make sure we get to the trade-off. So for out-of-market actions, do we consider tools used by other ISOs? How do we factor in reliability actions such as SRR? What is the impact to operators' out-of-market actions to real-time prices? When it comes to the scarcity pricing competitiveness with bilateral transactions, I'll leave this up. I won't read it to you, but I'll leave this up and give you guys a chance to see what it is that we picked up on. Again, really pushing the stakeholder community here to provide comment on this discussion paper. Are there any scope items that you feel should be added, right, to these themes? Are there any themes that you feel should be kind of the overarching theme that you feel should be included into this discussion? That's precisely what we're looking for as far as feedback on this discussion paper. Here you have the scope items or kind of early problem statements that we captured in the discussion for compatibility with pricing in RA in the broader West, right? The fact that ISOs will only be able to co-optimize energy in AS. How will that impact prices within ISO versus others? How would different RA programs and bidding rules across the regional footprint influence market outcomes, right? And again, all these are things that can lead to a problem statement, and we'll go into a little bit more detail, right? Whether we've identified a root cause as a result of it, whether we've identified a guiding principle, or whether we've identified either an intended market outcome or perhaps falling short of an intended market outcome. And then finally, with BAA level MPM, this one's a little bit more fresh, but the takeaways that we had from the discussion, benefits and cost analysis of the current construct, ensuring that if there is a group solution, that it's robust to failures for a BA that wouldn't have occurred in a single as it exists today. How do we ensure design does not create over mitigation? But I think these are all reflective of the conversation, but as we kind of move forward in this presentation and get to the problem statement creation workshop or formulation workshop, I hope that we can apply those principles into this discussion of BAA level MPM, right? And so I think you made some pretty good comments there of the principles that we could leverage for that problem statement formulation a little bit ago. So broadly speaking, right, we talked about these kind of thematic elements. Are there any additional themes that you feel should be added to that PFE working group conversation? I'm gonna skip forward on this one. Event producer, sorry, I'm kind of pulling an audible on you live here, and we'll edit our comment template to make sure that you're able to provide the feedback there. But to get to where we want to get to in these conversations, which are defined and refined problem statements, I think that the scope items are really what is important here. So if we could move to the next Slido set. Are there any additional scope items underneath these themes that you feel should be added for further discussion within the working group construct? And I apologize, it looks like this is an older deck where we don't have these numbered. But in essence, if you felt like there should be another item added to reflect the value of reliability and pricing scarce conditions, simply give us a number one and then add that scope item. So let's leave this open here for just a little bit so that we can move forward into the problem statement formulation. But let's go ahead, and if you could share your thoughts on any additional scope items. We kind of went over the things that we've captured thus far that are reflected in the discussion paper. And as always, open to taking any verbal comments. The discussion, I think, is really a lot of value, right? We appreciate the comments via Slido, but the open discussion, I think, is where we get the most value out of these working groups. So we're going to give a little bit of time for both Slido as well as anybody to raise their hand if there's something that they saw within the discussion paper that was not included that you think would be a good scope item for us to kind of continue the conversation into turning that to a problem statement. any additional scope items here. Event producer, do we have any hands up?
Hey, Juan. I don't see any hands up.
Okay. So Ryan, I'm going to take your feedback. Let's give it one more minute here. Or let's give it 2 more minutes. Let's give it to 3:12, and we'll go ahead and close out the Slido so we can review the results. And again, these can fall into any one of these topic areas or themes. Oh. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you for that. So then, number 1, how to reflect the value of reliability during scarce conditions. Number 2, how and when to enact or end scarcity pricing. Number 3, the out-of-market actions. 4, that competitiveness in bilateral transactions. 5, compatibility with pricing and RA programs in the broader West. And then 6, the BAA level market power mitigation topic, which we have discussed in the last session and a little bit earlier here today. So let's go ahead and close the poll out. Okay, so what about new products that are going to be introduced, like the new DAME products and balance reserves, reliability capacity? Aren't they subject to price formation principles? Scarcity pricing in balancing areas that have forward capacity requirements can incentivize companies with large supply portfolios to physically withhold. Scarcity pricing should not activate in a balancing area in which sufficient forward contracted capacity has been contracted for and made available. The design should be coupled with sufficient capacity payment based on base penalties on supply with forward contracts that did not make themselves available to disincentivize this sort of physical withholding. So a lot of really kind of an incentivization of physical withholding, right, and the different ways of that might impact. And then the only question I had remains on the settlements, adjustments, and offsets. So let's take these one at a time, really, to see what we can or can't address with them. As far as the newer products being introduced, subject to price formation principles, I mean, in a way, James, do you want to maybe take a crack at that one? This is an anonymous question. I feel it might need a little bit of clarification, but James, anything you want to respond to on that statement there?
So part of, discussion of scarcity pricing was intended to include, penalty prices and demand curves and such things. And we're not at the, it may be too early to discuss changes to DAME products since they are, being filed with FERC right now and won't be implemented for some time. But certainly part of the price formation process was intended to look at whether or not penalty prices and demand curves of cross-market products that the CAISO offers are sort of aligned, and to do a holistic view of that. And if that results in the need to potentially update something related to those products down the line, then certainly we could do that.
I appreciate that, James. I think that points right to kind of our feasibility principle, right? Not just from whether or not from a process perspective, it can happen in the required timelines, but also implementation timelines, right? So again, how these principles can kind of lead us to assessing trade-offs for problem statements, implementation timelines being something that need to be factored in. Any responses to, everybody should be able to see these Slido results. I'd be very curious to see if anybody would like to expand upon or respond to the feedback that we got here. I am seeing no hands here. So I appreciate everybody who gave some feedback. Again, these Slido comments will be posted on the initiative page, but I'm going to take, we have in the chat. So I guess in regards to the one about forward capacity requirements, can you elaborate on why this isn't covered in item number 5? So I'm not sure if that's directed to, Ryan Kurlinski also probably fits into number 5. Thank you, everybody who's engaging here via the chat. We'll definitely take that into, you'll see that reflected in the revised discussion paper that will be following this session. I want to give it a second because we had a couple of people jump in on the chat to kind of respond. Any other thoughts? Okay. All right, so PFE example problem statements. Again, I want to reiterate that these problem statements are illustrative, right? But how a problem is defined will influence how it is solved, and there may be many ways to define a problem when there's more than one relevant policy that is impacted. To the conversation earlier, when there is more than one principal trade-off, and that discussion needs to happen amongst the stakeholder community to arrive to that, to gauge those trade-offs, or when there's more than one impacted market outcome or function. So stakeholders, you all have different perspectives and experiences that can illustrate the root cause of a problem. And this working group concept is a collaborative process to help build these problem statements. Now, admittedly, I had a hard time kind of getting to an understanding of a problem statement, and this was incredibly helpful to me, so I hope that it is the same for you. So again, this is an iterative process. We can define a problem early on. Some of the conversation, some of the things that come out of that might be to gather more information, synthesize it. At that point, we could decide and take an action, and eventually monitor and evaluate, but you will see on the bottom of this graphic here that gathering more information and synthesis could lead us back to refining that problem statement, right? That monitor and evaluation could lead us back to the decision point. So the problem statement development is an iterative process, and one that really requires heavy participation from the stakeholder community, and we're really appreciative of all the time and effort that you guys give to us in joining these working groups to get to these problem statements and get towards good solutions here. So how to build a problem statement. What is a problem statement? Problem statement is an issue or a challenge that's related to California ISO market policy or process that impacts a market outcome. So what makes a good problem statement? A good problem statement is going to identify a root cause in terms of an existing market design policy or process. Now, we talk a lot about taking these scope items or taking these themes to get the scope items to then refine problem statements. What if a root cause is not known? Does that simply not make it a problem statement? No, it makes something that needs a little bit of more work to get to a problem statement that can then inform future policy development. So if a root cause is not known, then we need to explore how the current market policy or processes reflect the principles and support that market objective. Or we need to determine, the opposite, right? How these policies and processes may not meet their intended goal. But that root cause identified within a problem statement is what makes something a good problem statement that doesn't need that much more refinement in order for us to move forward with it. A good problem statement is also going to incorporate, back to that earlier conversation we were having about the conflicts that could exist between these principles, those trade-offs that are associated with those market principles, those guiding principles, which is why that discussion earlier is so important, and we're looking for your feedback on that in the comment template for the discussion paper itself. And then it also would illustrate, a good problem statement would illustrate how problems can create a measurable impact on that market outcome. And you'll notice all of these terms kind of underlined. And this is just, again, to kind of get us all on the same page as we go through the exercise of formulating problem statements. So let's talk a little bit about these underlined terms, and let's define them for ourselves so we're all moving forward in the same direction. So a market function is a function or an outcome of a regional centralized electricity market that reflects the role of the California ISO as an independent system operator. They might include reliability, operational cost recovery, competition. Principles are how that market design policy achieves a market outcome. So again, efficiency, transparency, feasibility. We had an earlier conversation on 3 other proposed principles. We're open to, again, these principles are going to evolve along with this conversation, so we're open to more, but again, it's how the market design policy achieves that market outcome. And the policy or process, we need to be able to identify that. So it describes an existing California ISO market policy or process that supports that market outcome. So that could be scarcity pricing or the co-optimization of ancillary services with energy. These are existing policies or existing processes that we have. Those policies and processes are meant to achieve a market outcome. Could they be enhanced? Is it working as is it working? Is it not working? This is the crux of formulating a problem statement and the kind of discourse that we want within these working groups. But I think most importantly, because again, to that first statement of how a problem statement is framed kind of shows how it is solved, the root cause. The root cause describes the failure in an existing policy to help achieve that market outcome. So, and not an exhaustive list, but again, just to provide some examples. That could be the lack of sufficient data or lack of process to achieve a market outcome, or that an existing policy no longer accommodates the shifting market conditions or regionalization. If we take a look back at the Western Interconnection 10 years ago, conditions are different, and maybe an existing policy no longer accommodates that shift. So we have a couple of examples here, and I want we'd really like active participation on this here, because this is going to be kind of the MO of us moving forward in the working group process. We're trying to get to defining these problem statements to then inform policy development further down the road. So the purpose of this exercise is just to familiarize the group with the process of problem statement development. The examples here are from real stakeholder comments received specific to the PFE working groups. But again, the discussion here is meant for illustrative purposes only. Our selection of these is in no way any form of endorsement of this problem statement. And this portion of today's discussion will not be reflected in the discussion paper as a result of that intent. So you're encouraged to take the conversation that we have here today, this afternoon, and then submit your own problem statements and build upon the discussions that have already occurred by suggesting different problem statement elements, those underlying terms, the salient problem statement elements that are needed in order to get there. So before we have Sylvia Spiewak on the phone, who I mentioned earlier. I was having a hard time. She did a wonderful job of kind of breaking this down for me. Before we move forward into the examples, are there any questions on kind of the intent of, what makes a good problem statement, or what we mean by market function, principles, policy, root cause, or is everybody comfortable there? And we can go ahead and move forward into the examples. So I want to take a pause there and see if there are any questions. So we got a question in the chat. Will requests for problem statements be part of the comments requested in response to the discussion paper? Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, we're hoping to kind of provide a framework of what is our target? Right? I mean, we're getting together and having these meetings. We're bringing forth a lot of really good perspectives, but our deliverable is that action plan. Let's reverse engineer from there. We need to get problem statements. So yes, the request for problem statements will be part of that comment template, and please feel free to hopefully leverage this to move into your own proposed stakeholder problem statements for further group discussion. You got it. Okay. All right, I'm hearing none, so let's go ahead and dive in to problem statement formulation. So example number 1. The CAISO may need to reevaluate administrative pricing for energy and ancillary services during periods of curtailed demand. So that's a real piece of feedback, a real comment that we got here. So draft problem statement here. During periods of curtailed demand, consumers may have been willing to pay more than the administratively set scarcity price cap. Now, I really don't want this to become a semantical exercise, but again, I think Sylvia did a great job of breaking this down for me. Hopefully I can recreate it for you guys. What is the difference? We're driving at the same thing, right? But what makes that a good problem statement? Number 1, the root cause is identified. The principles that we can go back to our principles and take a look at which ones exist. Where's the interplay with efficiency? We talked about prices should reflect the willingness to avoid involuntary curtailment. We'll have a lot of discussion about how to reflect that. That's one of the theme elements and something that we want comments and stakeholder presentation on, but it falls under that efficiency principle, and the market outcome is reliability. Again, this is a high-level problem statement. Again, not an endorsement, but this is a good problem statement example from that piece of feedback or that comment that we got, because again, we have an identified root cause. We can tie it to our principles so that we start getting into that conversation together as a stakeholder community. We can identify those principles to then have that trade-off or prioritization conversation. Again, a little bit further down the road in the working group process, but I don't want us to lose sight of the end goal, right? And then the market outcome here is reliability, right? So before we move to the next example, where we're going to work together to see if we can't take one of these comments, turn it into a problem statement where we talk a little bit about identification of a root cause, or which principles are we pulling, which principles do we see the dependencies on, and what the intended market outcome is. Any feedback or questions on how we went from the top here, which was the comment, to a draft problem statement? And I want to iterate here, I want to reiterate here, the problem statements aren't going to be done and then placed in there. It's an iterative process. So this is a good draft problem statement, but discussion will inevitably refine it. So I'm going to open it up. I'd like to open it up for the stakeholder community here, but also I'd like to open it up. Sylvia, is there anything that you want to add to what I said there?
No, I think you did a great job. I would also just note that this is a one-sentence draft problem statement, and there's plenty of opportunities to add something measurable or cite other principles in order to evaluate those trade-offs. So there's a reason why it's a draft, and Juan had already mentioned that this is an iterative process, so it'd be great if stakeholders could pull this apart, criticize it, add to it, etc.
All right, so Steve, I'm gonna read your comment in the chat here to the group. Prices should not increase solely because consumers are willing to pay more. Would a problem statement be more effective if it addressed a different root cause, like prices may need to increase to attract additional supply? Wondering if this may make for a more productive problem statement by targeting a root cause that is more actionable. So Steve, I'm gonna ask you directly, because you put this into the chat. That problem statement targeting a root cause that is more actionable. Let's take yours there. Prices may need to increase to attract additional supply. Which principles do you see being highlighted in the problem statement there? I don't mean to put you on the spot. If you can raise your hand, fine. But if you just want to do it via the chat, that's good as well. All right, let's go ahead and unmute Steve. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate your participation.
Yeah, no problem. Steve Galby, VPA. I think what I was keying into there is that when we see scarcity, a lot of times the issue may be a lack of competition. So I think maybe the principle that cited competition might be applicable here.
No, I appreciate that. Any reactions to kind of that riff on root cause, or anybody else see any other principles that might kind of come off of that problem statement that you proposed?
I really like Steve's comment, and I like how it starts with prices should not increase solely because consumers are willing to pay more. I know there have been a lot of conversations around consumer protection, and that could be cited as a possible market outcome.
Thank you, Sylvie. Let's go ahead and unmute Mike. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Hey everyone, this is Mike Whitney with NCPA. Yeah, I think that's a great point, because technically the way in the ISO, the way load bids into the market, 99% of load, they self-schedule. They're price takers. They'll pay anything. So, I just don't want to see that kind of taken advantage of, or maybe we need to start bidding in load. So that's just some things I've heard a couple times during the workshops is, load might be willing to pay more. Well, yeah, they put that signal in their bid. Their price takers don't pay anything. Thank you.
No, appreciate it, Mike. And I'm seeing chat questions. I'm seeing hands raised, and that's very encouraging because, again, this is what is going to be needed. This is the intent of the working groups, right, is to have this discussion to refine these problem statements. So, Kyle, I see your hand up, but I'm gonna read a comment in the chat here from CD, fearing that semantics are very difficult to avoid. Absolutely. Our end goal here is a written statement. So that resonates with me, CD. Answering the example draft problem statement with a question. Does demand actually even bid other than administratively? And I think Mike actually just touched on that. So CD, I just wanted to represent your question in the chat there. Kyle, why don't we go ahead and unmute Kyle?
A note that I'm sure probably some of us came over with Brenda from the Market Performance and Planning Forum, so apologies if the brains have been a little more fried than usual today. The one thing I would add here to this, well, just at first glance, something that stands out, and this is kind of going with Sylvie's last point, I might add the word some in front of consumers in this statement to maybe more accurately reflect, I think, that the sentiment that this is getting at without framing all consumers as having exactly the same willingness to pay.
No, very good, Kyle. I appreciate that comment. That's a good note. Any other reactions? We have this example here, but I think, as was teased earlier, we have the next example, which is a little bit more open-ended for us to kind of dig in and really tear apart. Sylvia, I see your hand. Please go ahead.
I love that note, some consumers, because I think it illustrates the challenge with achieving true efficiency here. If we don't know which consumers are willing to pay what, being able to reflect that in the market is extremely difficult. So maybe there's another principle or another way about doing this.
Okay, so let's move on to this one here. Energy storage resource bids, or Deb. Just want to, before Steve, I'm reacting to your note coming into chat, which I believe is for the last slide here. So it's a little concerning that the problem statement focuses on pricing where curtailed demand, lack supply seems to be the real problem. Steve, I think we're talking about efficiency there, right? I think we're talking about competition to incent said supply, and again we go back to the fact that when we put a draft problem, and I think Sylvie probably put this on a finer point on it than I did leading into it, but we put draft problem statement here, right? Simply because it identified root cause, principle, and the market outcome. Not to say that it doesn't need further refinement, as we're seeing through this discussion, and really kind of highlighting that iterative process. So I think that's a great. Oh no, Steve, trust me, I'm not taking that as slowing us down. I'm actually I'm loving this back and forth. This is, to me, the intent of the working group. So I appreciate you feeding that conversation. So. Yeah, no, very good. Let's go on to the next one here, just so we can kind of take this exercise a little bit further, kind of build that muscle memory, because I feel like we're kind of breaking older muscle memory, right? The working group construct is something new for us, so let's build up this muscle memory of taking a look at one of the functions or one of the pieces of a problem statement, and seeing how we can't refine it, add in. What is the market outcome? What is the root cause? What are the principles that we're going to leverage later on for potential trade-offs? So energy storage resource bids, or DEBs, are limited to a bid cap of $1,000 a megawatt hour, even when the cap is raised to $2,000 a megawatt hour, which disincentives these resources from delivering at bid cost. So we have a root cause identified here as the energy storage bid caps. I'd really like to hear from the group here, what are the possible principles? I know we list efficiency here, but out of our principles, and again, if you scroll up in the chat, or Brenda, maybe if you wouldn't mind doing me a favor and throwing the discussion paper link back into, kind of float it to the bottom of the chat to have it handy for everybody. When you take a look at the principles that we've discussed, as well as the 3 new ones, what are the possible principles that you see that could be applied to this draft problem statement? And what is the market outcome that we are trying to get to, right? Because if we're able to define that market outcome, sometimes it's easier to back into the problem statement, reverse engineer, you know, the market outcome. What is it we're trying to solve? That's what we're trying to get to. What are the challenges that you as a stakeholder are seeing in these areas? What are we trying to solve? What are your perspectives on that? So Brenda put the, yep, there we go, the discussion paper link down there. So that's just kind of an easy reference for everybody. So I'd like to pause here and let's see if we can get some hands up. And any reactions to this problem statement, draft problem statement here? What are the principles that you guys see tying into this? Mike, appreciate your participation, sir. Let's go ahead and unmute Mike.
This is Mike Whitney with NCPA. And if the storage is charging from a co-located PV, then I mean, the energy is pretty much free. So that's just one thing that came to mind. But I mean, is that true? I don't understand why, if CAISO raises the bid cap in cyber, why they wouldn't be able to get in 2,000 if they can justify the costs, you know, especially if the power, the charging, you know, the charging power costs 2,000 because the market conditions justify it.
Oh, Don, I see your hand. I want to reflect Sybil. I see Sean as well. So guys, let's give it a second here. So Sybil, I want to make sure that your chat comment gets out there for the rest, and maybe also potentially gets reacted to. So the market outcome is that price formation should incentivize resources to follow their dispatch instructions as that's, well, I guess you're posing that as a question, right? So let's put a pin in that one and come back to it. And then Dawn, let's go Dawn first, and then Sean. So if we could unmute Dawn, please. There we go.
Don Trethewey, California Energy Storage Alliance. I think the issue here, Juan, is when the caps are raised to 2,000, the DEBs are adjusted accordingly from an opportunity cost. I think the issue you run into here is when the day-ahead market clears very close to $1,000, but you haven't triggered increasing the cap to $2,000, it becomes very difficult to manage the resource because in real time, because you may need to bid higher so that earlier in the day so that you don't get inadvertently discharged. And so it's really more around when prices clear very high in the day ahead, you have to actually open up the flexibility so that they can express a willingness to at least like maintain their day ahead schedules.
Appreciate that, Don. And any reactions to that? Sean, let's go ahead and unmute Sean.
I was thinking of the value of simplicity for this example, which I believe the definition was stated as rules being applied indiscriminately. Now, in this case, it does seem that storage is being discriminated against. Even in the case where they have a co-located resource to charge off of, you may call the marginal cost 0 of solar generation, but it has still an opportunity cost of selling at 2,000. For example, on September 6th, 2022, prices began to be 2,000 at 2 p.m. I think that's where this example comes from, and I would really like us to solve this particular problem. So, so storage, for this value of simplicity, we may not want to discriminate against it in this regard. But I also wanted to add, on the value of simplicity, I'm not sure that I quite liked the definition. The definition seems to be something more to do with equity or fairness. But I do think that a value of simplicity would be valuable in this initiative. I would say what's needed for simplicity is something like employing a minimum number of processes, parameters, and calculations, a minimum necessary number. Because, we already have like 14 different whiteboards of Rube Goldberg pieces in this marketplace, so we should just try not to make things worse. Thank you.
No, I appreciate your participation, Sean. And again, the draft problem statements here are not going to be included in the discussion paper, and we want to be really mindful of that because this is for you, the stakeholder community, right, to inform the California ISO. But that being said, Sean, just have that be reflective of your comments to the discussion paper itself. Again, the comment template will be for discussion paper and this session. Any reactions to Sean or Don? Okay, I am seeing none. Okay. Well, I do want to move forward into our final Slido poll. Looks like we're doing good on time, but my hope is twofold. Number one, that active sharing of perspective and reactions. I'd like to encourage that, and I was very encouraged by how that conversation kind of opened up when we put these draft problem statements in front of this community. Now, with the second part is kind of having clearly defined what it is that we're going after. And again, you're going to have an opportunity to do this in the comments themselves. But if we could go ahead and open up this Slido poll, please. With this reframing of a draft problem statement, do any draft problem statements come to mind for this group to consider? Whether that is to be included in the revised discussion paper as potentially a scope item, or if it's a great problem statement to go into further discussion in the upcoming thematic session. So let's go ahead. Again, multiple avenues here. If you want to put it in chat, feel free. I'd love it if you raised your hand because then we can have that discussion. Or if you want to simply use the Slido tool. So, event producer, if we could launch the Slido question here, but with the reframing of a draft problem statement and one that contains at least multiple pieces of that we defined earlier, meaning it can be tied back to our principles, it can identify a root cause, it can identify the market outcome or the specific policies or processes that are either would be impacted or are impacting the draft problem statement. Anything come to mind? Let's go ahead and raise hands, put it in the chat, or give me the Slido. So, my producer, I'm not sure if it's perhaps me as a panelist or presenter, but I am not seeing the Slido. Could I get just show of hands or thumbs up from the stakeholder community here? Are you guys seeing the Slido poll? Hands and thumbs up meaning you're seeing it? Nope. Okay. Listen, we love Slido for several reasons, right? I think as we are moving into, the potential trade-offs discussions, the functionality of being able to rank, things of that nature, and getting that live feedback is great. But for something open-ended like this, let's go back to pre-Slido days, right? If you have a draft problem statement that comes to mind off of this conversation, please put it into the chat or raise your hand. And let's, I need one brave volunteer to put something out there, and maybe we could start pulling on some threads and seeing if we can't get to a point where we've refined it to include all of the elements of what we're calling a problem statement here as a group. No takers. It was an eventful day. Kyle, your comment resonates with me, right? A good MPPF, a lot of calls today, and this one's end of the day. So no worries if not. We are going to have, again, multiple avenues for you guys to propose these. And we're really looking forward to what we get from this community, because this is, in essence, where you get to shape that conversation in future sessions, right? So let's go ahead and talk about those future sessions. So next steps. Next steps here, again, we're open to the feedback via the comment tool, but we have posted a discussion paper. Please provide your feedback. We will be incorporating feedback from this session and the comments given via Slido, the chat, as well as the commenting tool, and turning that into a revised discussion paper. This will simply reiterate each session. Again, it's meant to serve, the intent is for it to serve as a record, so to speak, of the evolution of the conversation. That in its own right is open to your feedback, so if you feel very strongly one way or the other about that, please share that with us. Again, we want these working groups to be for you guys. We will be also talking about the working group schedule itself. Oh, I see the Slido now. Please feel free. I don't think we're going to have time to present those and go through them, but again, we will post a Slido comment to the initiative page. So if you'd like to, please go ahead and do that there. We will be posting a revised working group schedule. We move to the bi-weekly cadence. We would like to start kind of giving a heads up of what the themes of each of these upcoming working group sessions are going to be. That's going to help in the preparation of presentations and the preparation just for your own, scheduling and bandwidth. We have our PFE working group session number 6. So Brenda, looks like this is an older deck, so I want to clarify, and what we'll do is we'll post the correction to the stakeholder initiative page. It's a slight correction, but right now working group session number 6 is tentatively October 12th, which is a Thursday, so October 12th of 2023. We'd like to begin the discussion on fast start pricing here. So very similar to BAA level MPM, we're going to have a little bit of a level set, some history and background, so we can have an informed discussion and then provide, in essence, kind of a basic framework of scope. Just again, like the illustrative examples, to provide a framework to begin incorporating feedback. Again, phase 1 of PFE is driving towards the scope of an analysis of fast start pricing so that we can have a much more informed discussion on fast start pricing in the second phase of this initiative. So with that, I'm going to toss this back to Brenda to close us out.
Great. Thanks, Juan. I appreciate that. We will go ahead and get those slides updated. As well, we will be sending out a notice in reference to the upcoming working group session that we have later this October month, since we are wrapping up September. We thank so much for everyone who has been with us all day. We definitely understand that there was a few meetings going on, but we are doing our very best to go make sure we have these meetings all recorded and will be posted shortly at the Stakeholder Initiative Price Formation Enhancement webpage. As well, for any other questions that may have not been answered during the call, feel free to send them over to myself or my ISO stakeholderaffairs@kaizo.com. We're also going to be opening up that comment template for the discussion paper, as well as for that working group, for this working group session 5, for any feedback or any comments that were made during the call. So definitely there's a lot of room for opportunity to provide feedback to us. We definitely are taking everyone's participation to the max, and we definitely want to go ahead and wrap up this call pretty early. But the last note I have is that the pre-registration process to join meetings are all for all future meetings. Feel free to pre-register. Notices will be going out detailing that specific link, and it will be a form going towards the name, your name, address, your name, email, and organization. As well, there will be a different registration if we were to do hybrid. There's another registration link, that's RegFox, that will be sent out also. But at this time, we are currently doing virtual meetings, but we will keep you informed if we do. And then that link for that attendance was sent out earlier this meeting, so hopefully people were able to see that for today's call. And lastly, but not least, we do have this Energy Matters ISO blog that was just featured and sent out this past week, and it's in regards to the WEIM evolution. So it's a great YouTube video to detail about what has happened since the launch of 2014 with our WEIM. So it's a great, definitely take the time to look at it, and there's a lot of information in there, as well as that great diagram presented by our CEO. But other than that, we thank so much everyone for participating, and thank you for staying with me for most of the day. If you were there, you did a great job, and we look forward to you on the next upcoming working group meeting. I'll go ahead and send it off to my event producer to close this meeting. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great one.